I do not believe my own eyes.
Is that really who I think it is? I have returned to tell the truth.
Everyone thought she was dead until she walked into the village meeting 10 years later. For 10 years, everyone in Hollowbrook had believed Evelyn Marsh was dead. And by now they told Daniel Vale so to his face, gentle as they could, the way you tell a man his dog is gone and not coming back. The morning of the meeting came in sideways rain. December the 23rd, a Tuesday that felt like a Sunday, the village buttoned under a sky the color of old pewter. Daniel stood in the kitchen of the cottage by the mill stream and made tea he did not drink. On the mantelpiece stood the photograph from the summer of the fete, Evelyn holding the prized sunflower, squinting into the sun, the white crescent scar on her thumb. 10 years it had stood there, dusted, straightened, looked at. Last night he had taken it down, laid it face down in the drawer with her good scarf, and lain awake listening to the rain, realizing he could no longer remember whether she had laughed first or spoken first the day they met. That forgetting frightened him more than the grief ever had. Amos Marsh had sent the papers in the autumn. Presumption of death, they called it. 10 years missing. The estate wanted settling, and someone had to sign. Daniel had not signed, and he had not fought. A difference he felt every morning like a stone in his shoe. He walked to the church hall with his collar up. St. Mark's, red brick, the Christmas tree and the porch shedding needles on the wet tiles. Daniel's own class had rehearsed the same nativity pageant for a month. He was supposed to be the ox. That was the level of his life now. Playing the ox, eating Mrs. Petty's mince pies. The hall was warm and close, smelling of damp coats and tea urns. Folding chairs in rows. The parish table at the front where Amos Marsh presided as he had over the magistrate bench for 30 years. Silver hair, folded hands. The calm of a man who has never once been interrupted in a courtroom he controlled. Reverend Alder stood beside him, chairing a meeting he wished were anywhere else. Mrs. Petty found Daniel at the back. "It's the right thing," she said, and patted his arm, and he let her, because she meant well. Her companion leaned in. Her mother's coat. That's what they found. Her mother's coat by the water. You'd think a body would wash up and not a coat. Daniel thought about the coat. The old green one Evelyn had worn the winter Margaret Marsh died. The one she said she'd never wear again because it smelled of lavender and grief. The police had called it her coat. Daniel had said, quietly, for years, a coat isn't a person. Amos tapped the table with his pen. 10 o'clock. Let's begin. Reverend Alder read the preamble the way a man reads a eulogy for someone he never met, which was close to the truth. He had come to Hollowbrook 4 years after Evelyn went, whereas the said Evelyn Mary Marsh has not been seen or heard of for a period exceeding 10 years. The words drifted over the room like smoke from the tea urn. Mrs. Petty leaned in. 10 years, and he still keeps her mug on the. Daniel heard her, and then he did not, because the rain had come down harder, drumming on the corrugated roof like it wanted in. Amos took over from the vicar. He had a way of making even a presumption of death sound like a summing up to a jury. 10 years of waiting is a long time, he said, and heads nodded. The application has been properly filed. The court will require nothing further from this parish except its quiet. When a person is gone that long, the law allows us to grieve. And grief, properly done, is how we honor her. The doors opened. They did not crash. The wind shouldered them open a few inches, and rain came in slanting off the step, and a woman in a long duffel coat pushed them wide enough to step through, pulling a small girl behind her by the hand. The girl held a red paper boat, crushed a little, the kind you fold from newspaper when the rain keeps you indoors. The woman shook water from her hood and looked around the room the way you look when you are counting familiar faces, and her eyes found Daniel at the back before they found anyone else. And that was how the whole hall knew at once, with a feeling like a dropped teacup, that they were looking at Evelyn Marsh. 10 years had changed her. Shorter hair, a leaner face, a small darn at her elbow, wet boots, lines at her eyes not in the photograph on his mantelpiece. but the thumb holding the little girl's hand carried the same white crescent scar. And Daniel watched his own hands rise from the arms of his chair like they understood before he did. The quiet was a particular kind. 30 people who had all recognized a dead woman at the same moment, each waiting for someone else to speak first. The girl looked up. Her voice carried the way small voices do. Mom, Mom, why is everyone staring at you? Evelyn looked down at her daughter, then at the table at the front, at Amos, whose hands had gone still on the notice, and said, into the room, in a voice that only shook a little, "You don't need to declare me dead. I'm here." Mrs. Petty dropped the teapot. The lid bounced across the lino and rolled, and Evelyn's daughter watched it and said, "Mom, there's a lid going under the chairs." And somebody laughed, one short broken laugh, and the silence came back in, harder than before. Reverend Alder had gone the color of the altar candles. "Evelyn," he said, and it was not a question. "No," said Amos Marsh. He said it standing, both hands flat on the notice, in the same even voice that had sent men to prison without ever raising. "This is not my daughter. My daughter is dead. I buried her coat by the water 10 years ago. Whoever this is not Evelyn, and this parish will not be taken in by some." He found the word and made it small and cruel, by some woman with a story. Evelyn did not flinch. 10 years before, Evelyn Marsh had flinched at raised voices and slammed doors in the silence in her father's house. The woman in the duffel coat stood steady as a fence post, her daughter's hand in hers, and said, "Hello, Dad." The word hung in the warm, damp air like something thrown. Amos's jaw worked. "You will not call me that. What should I call you?" She said it without anger, which made it worse. "I've thought about it for 10 years. I still don't know." The side door opened and Dr. Patil slipped in, shaking out her umbrella, and stopped on the threshold. Dr. Patel had been the village GP for 22 years, had known Evelyn as a girl in a school dress, had held Margaret Marsh's hand at the end, and everyone in that hall knew to listen when she spoke. She shut the door and cleaned her glasses, what she did when she was buying time. "Amos," she said quietly, "you filed these papers without asking me." The room shifted, 30 people turning like a field of corn in wind. Amos's smile did not reach his eyes. "The surgery has no standing in a matter of presumed death, Nisha." "Presumed," said Dr. Patel. She walked up the aisle, and the room parted for her. She set her handbag down on the parish table dead center, in front of the notice, like a chess move. "You know what she left with me, Amos." "The night she went." "I know nothing of the kind," said Amos, but his voice had changed by the smallest degree, like ice cracking somewhere below the surface. Dr. Patel opened the bag. What she set on the table was a small silver locket on a worn chain, and the room drew a breath it had not known it was holding, because every person there recognized it. Margaret Marsh's locket, worn by Evelyn's mother for 40 years, and by Evelyn after her, seen at every fete and funeral in Hollowbrook, right up until the coat was found by the water, and the locket, like Evelyn, was not. "Open it," said Dr. Patel. Amos did not move. "Open it, or I will." Reverend Alder, with the care of a man handling something holy, pressed the catch. Inside lay a coil of dried lavender the color of a bruise, and a curl of dark hair. "She left this with me on the 3rd of December, 10 years ago," said Dr. Patel, her voice calm and clinical. "She said, if anyone ever tries to declare me dead, you show them that. You show them Margaret's locket, and you tell them I wasn't dead. I was hiding." The word hiding went through the room like a needle. "I examined her the day before she went, and now her voice had an edge. I knew what I knew, and I said nothing, because she asked me not to, and because I was afraid of you, Amos, the way half this village is. I will carry that to my grave." Amos's hand, flat on the notice, was trembling, the first tremor anyone had ever seen the man make. "You have no idea what you—" "There's more," said Dr. Patel. She took from the bag a plain white envelope. sealed with wax, the way you seal a letter you mean to be the last thing you write. She held it a moment, her eyes wet, then walked it down the aisle, past the overturned teapot lid, and put it into Daniel's hands. She wrote this last spring, Dr. Patel said, low, for him alone, though the whole hall was listening with its held breath. She said she would never have the courage to send it. She made me promise that if she ever came back, or if they ever tried to make her dead, you were to have it. Daniel's hands were not steady on the envelope. He looked past the rows of faces at the woman by the door, holding the small girl's hand. The red paper boat crushed in the child's fist, the same crescent scar on her thumb, watching him with an expression he had waited 10 years to understand. Read it, said Evelyn. Please. The wax cracked along the fold. The letter was one page, handwritten, the writing small and careful, the way of someone who has had to make herself small for other people. Daniel read it all at once, and then again, slowly, trying to slow the words. Daniel read it twice, and when he looked up, the room was watching him, and Evelyn was still by the door, and her daughter was watching him too, head tilted, trying to solve him like a puzzle. Under the door, Daniel said. His voice came out strange to his own ears, like a voice from another room. You left it under the door. Under the door, she agreed. The night it rained like this. I slid it under, and I stood in the lane until your light went out, and then I walked to the station with nothing but a bag, because I could not take anything he would know to look for. I never got it, Daniel said. He was not looking at Evelyn now. He was looking past her, at the front of the hall, at the man whose hands lay flat on the notice of a dead woman's estate. There was no letter. I checked every morning for a year. Silence. The long, loaded silence of a room full of people doing arithmetic with the same numbers. Evelyn turned slowly and looked at her father. You knew. You knew I left something for him. Amos did not speak. He had become, in the space of it, an old man, patched together out of magistrate and father and monument, none of the patches quite holding. What did you do with it? Evelyn's voice had gone quiet, the way it used to go quiet when she was a girl being brave about something she was afraid of. Dad, what did you do with my letter? Fires, said Amos Marsh, and it was the first true thing he had said in 10 years. Flat, ruin, all the fine gravel gone from his voice. I burned everything that winter. The letter, the scraps. I burned all of it. I thought. He stopped, and the room heard the machinery of his pride grinding against something it had never been built to touch. I thought if I burned it all, she would be dead properly. I thought that was what mourning was. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 10 years, and I have. He could not finish, and he did not have to, because the room had known Amos Marsh for 40 years and had never seen him fail to finish a sentence. That failure said everything his voice could not. Mrs. Petty was crying in that soundless way. Why, said Daniel. It came out flat. She was your daughter. Amos looked up at last, and there was something bare in his eyes, stripped, like the inside of a house after a flood. Because she left me first, he said. Her mother left me, and then she left me. And the child, his eyes moved, for the first time, to the little girl by the door, and hung there, and something in his face changed, just for a second, like weather. The child. He did not finish. He sat down heavily in front of the notice that had tried to make his daughter dead, and looked at his hands, and the room held its breath. The rain pressed against the windows like it wanted in out of the cold. Sadie, said Evelyn, and there is a particular way a mother says a child's name when it is time for the child to come and stand by her. The girl came, red paper boat still crushed in one fist, and stood against her mother's leg, eyeing the adults like a delegation too large to trust. This is Sadie, Evelyn said to the room. She's 9. And then, to Daniel, and her voice cracked on his name for the first time, after holding steady through all of it. Daniel, she's yours. She's been yours since before I left. And I told you in the letter, and I've told her about you every night of her life. And I brought her here because she stopped. The next part took something out of her, visibly, like a splinter coming out of a hand, because she needs an operation. Her heart, in January. And the hospital wants a legal guardian with a legal name. And I've been nobody for 10 years, Daniel. I've been a ghost with a sewing machine and a rented room. I couldn't sign for my own daughter. I couldn't let her go into that operating room as a dead woman's child. The thing, the practical thing, the terrible thing, settled over the room. At the front, Dr. Patel looked at Amos. Her voice was level, almost kind. The murmur runs in your family, Amos. It's your line it comes down. Your granddaughter is having your heart fixed in January. Amos looked at the little girl, and for one moment his face was naked in a way no one in that hall had ever seen it. And then he looked away, and no one pressed him. Sadie tugged her mother's coat. Mom, are you crying? No, said Evelyn, who was. You are, said the girl, matter of fact, with the whole village listening. You said crying is all right anyway. And she put her small hand into her pocket and brought out a folded piece of paper, creased 100 times, soft as fabric. I drew him, she announced, to the room, to the ceiling, to whichever adult would listen. I drew my dad. Mom said he's tall, and he teaches reading, and he laughs like the first rain on a tin roof, and he makes boats. She held the drawing out in front of her like a shield. He's got glasses and a boat. See? Daniel did not remember crossing the hall. He knew later only that the distance happened. The rows of chairs passed, and then he was kneeling on the lino in front of a 9-year-old girl, showing him a drawing of himself, done in felt tip and absolute certainty. The glasses, the boat, the tall stick figure, and underneath, in wobbly letters, the words MYDAD. He made a sound. It was not a laugh, not quite. It caught in his throat like a sob trying to be something else. Sadie's head came up, and she stared at him with Evelyn's eyes, and she said, "That's it. That's the sound." Mom said it sounds like first rain on a tin roof, said Daniel, and his voice broke in the middle of it. The whole village could watch him fall apart on the lino, and he would not apologize. Were you my dad all along? Said Sadie. Even before, said Daniel. Always. I just, he had to stop and start again. His voice gone where voices go when they are caring too much. I just didn't know you existed, sweetheart. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know. Sadie considered this. Then she put the crushed red paper boat into his hand with the solemn care of a child handing over something irreplaceable. Mom says you can make them go fast, she said. She says you used to race her on the mill stream. I did, said Daniel, and his thumb pressed the boat flat, folding a fresh crease along the old one, the habit surfacing like a fish. I always beat her. She always made me let her win. He looked up at Evelyn, still by the door, arms folded hard across her chest, the way you hold yourself when you are afraid of what you might do with your hands. She still makes me let her win. Evelyn laughed once, a short sound like a hiccup, and then she was crying, properly crying, in front of God and the village and her father, and she did not turn away this time. She stood there and let them see it. A ring of hands and shoulders and wet wool and tea-scented kindness closed around the three of them. Reverend Alder picked up the notice of presumption of death, turned it over in his hands like an object he no longer recognized, and set it down. I believe, he said, that the application is void, on the grounds that the applicant is, and he looked across the hall at Evelyn Mary Marsh, alive, and his voice wobbled beautifully, is present. I move we adjourn to the mince pies. Somebody laughed. Somebody else was already crying. Over the rain the bells of St. Mark's began ringing for the practice, tinny and eager, and Daniel stood up slowly, because kneeling on wet lino is harder to come up from than it used to be, and held out his hand to a 9-year-old girl who took it without hesitation. the way children take the hands of people they have already decided to love. "Can you teach me the boat?" said Sadie as they reached the door. "I can teach you the boat," said Daniel, "and the sunflower, and how to say morning like it's news." "That's what she said Sadie, delighted. At the door he stopped and looked back at the notice on the table, then at the old man still sitting behind it, very small now. Amos Marsh did not look up. Daniel did not wait for him to. Before they left the hall, someone had pressed Margaret's locket back into Evelyn's hand, and she wore it at her throat now, the way her mother had worn it for 40 years. They walked to the cottage through the softened rain, the rain that had come down hard all morning and now fell the way it falls when it has said what it came to say. Sadie walked between them, holding both their hands, the paper boat riding loose in her pocket, and Daniel could feel Evelyn's shoulder against his arm, and they did not speak. And the not speaking was not silence. It was the sound of 10 years beginning to be over. At the cottage, with the kettle on and Sadie kneeling at the hearthrug to inspect the Christmas cards propped along the mantel, Daniel went to the drawer. Her good scarf was there, folded, and beneath it the photograph, face down. He carried it out and lowered it to Sadie's eye level. "That's your mom," he said. "That's the summer of the sunflower. She'd cut her thumb that morning on a jam jar and dropped the biggest jar of strawberry jam in the parish. And look at her. 15 minutes later, she was laughing for the camera like the sun belonged to her." Sadie traced a small finger over the scar in the photograph. "Is that your scar?" she asked her mother. Evelyn came to look and held out her thumb, and the white crescent lay at the same angle, the same size. "It's my scar. We match," said Sadie. The photograph went back to the mantelpiece that evening, face up, where it had always been. Daniel set it there himself, straightened it once, and stood looking at it until Evelyn came to stand beside him. Behind them, their daughter knelt on the hearthrug, folding a fresh boat out of newspaper, humming. For 10 years, everyone in Hollowbrook had believed Evelyn Marsh was dead. For 10 years, she had been hiding. And for the rest of it, the whole village would agree on this one thing only, without a single argument. She was home,